Every single day, people take unwanted or unused items to thrift and antique stores across the country. But as the saying goes, one man's trash is another man's treasure, and we're here to prove it. Identify valuable things before you throw them away. Join us as we show and tell of treasures found and sold by a full-time reseller with the hopes of helping you find some treasures of your own. Welcome to the What's Sold podcast.
Welcome to the What Sold podcast. I feel like it's happy days are here again. We are starting to feel the sort of we're on the downward side of the downhill side of Hurricane Helene. Long way to go before the cleanup is done, but I feel like we're starting to get our life back to normal a little bit. Thank you to all of you that reached out and continue to reach out. There's still an incredible amount of need here in Western North Carolina, but it is a little shocking how just the littlest things can be so powerful, like your water coming back and things of that nature. We do have our water. We have the trifecta of water, power, and Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi, I think forever we thought, Wi-Fi, it's so fun. It's so neat. Now it's completely necessary. It's a utility. If you don't have Wi-Fi, there's not a lot you can do, especially in our business. For podcasting, we're not doing it if we're not Wi-Fi.
Right.
So anyway, it's good to be back with you, Matt. How was your week? How'd everything go since last time we talked?
It was a busy week. It was good, but you're absolutely right. We don't think about those things we take for granted. And it is, I think, a healthy thing to be reminded of the privileges that we have to have things like running water, electricity, internet access. So we've been, I've been trying to do some work. I have sold some things. I've been putting more into my the YouTube work, and we've been getting back to doing these podcasts, and so I think we're in a good place. But like you said, every time you drive out of your home and drive around the area, it's all hitting you in your face again with what's out there and just the difficulties. We had our basement flooded a little bit, and I had an insurance adjuster come out and take a look, and he very quickly said, they're not going to cover this. And he said that he had heard from his insurance agency that of all insurance companies, of all of the homes and buildings and businesses that were damaged as a result of this hurricane, only 0.8% of them are going to be covered. So that means 99.2% will get zero coverage. People will have complete losses. And there will be so much land and so many buildings that will need to be demolished, and people won't be able to do anything. I mean, I've heard FEMA is going to be giving out 0% loans for businesses for people, but it's like, if you lose everything and then you have to take out more debt, that doesn't sound like a step ahead.
No, it's still just you have to pay it back.
Course.
So it's like, I was talking to my auto mechanic who I love. Shout out to Bobby Monteith at Monteith Auto down on Swananoa River Road. And he said the same thing. He's like, well, I don't want to take out a loan because then I just have to pay it back. He'd worked really hard, and business has been there for 80 years, started by his grandfather. It was the best shop in the world. And I think he has some resources in reserve as opposed to a lot of people, but still, it's just painful. And the strange part, we're not a political show at all, but I find it fascinating that the largest buildings in almost every city in America are insurance buildings, and yet when insurance has to pay out, it's like they're just not going to do it. You're like, well, what was the point of having to have insurance if it's not going to actually insure anything? It's just interesting, and I'm sure they say, it's acts of God, but isn't that why we pay into this system to get support when we need? I just don't understand it. I'm sure there's some rationale. Well, usually it has to do with building giant buildings.
These are for-profit companies, these insurance companies. They want you to pay them. They don't want to have to pay out. And so they put these other little tiny policy addendums on, like flood coverage, which in the mountains, how many times in multiple generations of people living in one house would you need flood insurance? Basically never. Once every 100 years, maybe. And so, people living in the valleys are certainly going to be wising up to that if they choose to rebuild or if people choose to move in. But again, who wins in that case? Well, if they don't have to pay for another 100 years, the insurance companies win again, because people will now buy that coverage and that they likely won't have to use it. So it is sad. I feel really bad for everything from people who lost loved ones, who family members who actually did not survive, all the way to people who lost just a single vehicle. We have a mutual friend who has a handyman business in our town. He lost 4 or 5 vehicles and a lot of his equipment. And he's trying to he has employees he wants to pay. He pays them well. They work hard. They do good work. But he's trying to get paid work right now. And in some cases, having to just like ask friends if they have equipment that he can borrow because so much of his stuff was damaged. And yet he has a business to run. It boggles the mind how nuanced the problems are that are caused by this. And this is not, to look further in the future. What does this do to the industry in the area? What does this do to the businesses when people come in and buy these properties in the coming years and rebuild? How does that inform what our community looks like and the feel of community and what is coming in, what's going to be coming in now? And I don't know what that looks like. All I know is that, recently some people made comments on our YouTube channel and said, you just take your losses and get out of there. It's easier to rebuild someplace else. And that is probably true. But for us, at least for now, we don't have any plans to go anywhere. I want to stay and help rebuild our community as best that I can. And I'm doing that with funds for my business. I'm doing that with money that viewers have graciously given. Some people have directly given money to me through the Rusty the Reseller channel and or are sending supplies. And we'll come back around to this idea at the end of this podcast. But if I find things or if people give me things, I'm going to sell those and I'm putting that into the hands of people that need it in my area. It is easy to leave, but that's just not the kind of people that you and I are. It's just take care of ourselves.
I also think we live in a beautiful place that is the majestic nature of this area is one of the big draws for people to come here. So to go, it's not like we're in some small flat town where it's just sort of whatever, it's little town USA, and there's nothing wrong with little town USA, but it's easy to say we'll just move to another little town USA. But we're in a very unique city and it will rebuild and for lots of reasons. But to just say pick up and go, and I do understand that sentiment, I truly do, because in some ways you do the business math and the business calculus and you're like, yeah, okay, this isn't going to make any sense. Excuse me. And when we look at that river plain that is a floodplain and say, well, perhaps we need to look at how we built there and how we continue to build there. But by the way, our floodplain is not the only floodplain in the United States. There are lots of them. I was talking to a friend who grew up in beautiful St. Louis, Missouri.
I lived there for a while myself.
Home, yeah. Yeah, and he was saying when he was a kid, he's a rather older gentleman now, he's in his 80s, and he was saying that before they kind of built up the infrastructure, says every year in the spring, they just have these floods that would kind of come through. And I think that it's very short-sighted to simply be a consumer as opposed to saying, well, this happened. It's a bummer that the insurance companies are greedy. And I say that not even tongue-in-cheek, because sometimes I'm like, you're right, it's for profit and they're selling stocks and people want that. But it's like, well, the whole purpose of your company is to insure people when bad things happen. So if you think about all the flood insurance they took in from the last 1916 hurricane, that's a lot of money.
The 2004 flooded Biltmore Village.
Right.
It flooded not nearly as heavily in, 2018, 2019? I was a part of a business that had a building in Biltmore Village, and it was flooded, and we could not go back into that building. And a First Watch, it's like a breakfast brunch franchise, has gone into that space. They're flooded again. So, I think that's a good point. We can be consumers, and we are consumers, but I think that it's also good to be a provider and at times. And so if all of the people with the resources and the people who escaped the disaster leave, what does that do? And what kind of a message does that send? So, we are fortunate enough that we have the time and the resources now to stay and help. And so that's what we're going to do. And it will rebuild better and faster if there are other people that also choose to do that. So this is where my business is. This is where my family is. This is where my spouse has a job that she likes and that takes care of her. We have a lot of friends in the community. We have a church family. We have a lot here, and we have a lot invested here. And that doesn't just go away because we have a few heavy rains. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And or lots of things. There are places around the world that, that are struggling with natural disasters, wars, all those things. And at some point, yes, you have to leave for various reasons, but we are not there in Western North Carolina. I fundamentally believe that we will grow back. And I guess the only thing I would honestly say, and I have no power to do any of this, but I would voice my opinion if somebody asked me, is that, hey, we need to look at this. We need to learn from this situation and say, and I think I'll segue that into what we're going to talk in the show today, but ultimately, you better learn from the things that happen. There are mistakes that I have made in my business. There's mistakes you've made in your business that you look at and you say, oh, yeah, I'm not going to do that again, or I'm going to plan differently that. So I'm hoping that as a general region, we look at it and say, there's no way you can plan for everything. There just simply is not. No one could have planned for COVID, but we could have planned for a response to COVID. So, there are things that you can do to say, okay, sometimes there's just nothing you can do, but most of the time you can plan ahead. So I think that is, you and I are both very much simpatico in our desire to rebuild, help to rebuild. I'm working with my neighbor across the street who's this wonderful guy. He's a builder, actually, and he's got a big giant tree, and we're going to go cut it up and parse it into firewood, As I'm like, hey, if you get lemons, make lemonade, Matt. So anyway, what did you sell anything this week? I mean, I know you've been sort of recovering, but did you sell anything?
I did. Speaking of planning ahead, I mean, I'm going to just discuss a couple of items because I've got some other things I want to show and discuss later in the show today. But these are both items that sold this week that I had prior to the events of those last 3 weeks. And the reason I have such a large amount of inventory is that the reason I got into doing reselling in the first place was that I lost my job due to COVID. And when that happened, I said, okay, if I'm going to work for myself, I need to take measures to prepare for if there's some sort of event that occurs again where I'm unable to acquire items so that I can sell. And so I have a bunch, thousands of items here. I could work for a few months without having to source again if, say, there was a health crisis and I had to quarantine, for example. So one of the things I sold is this little white ceramic. It's kind of shaped like a genie lamp, if you can imagine, like a genie lamp.
I was going to say, it looks like a genie lamp. Did you rub it?
Exactly. This is made to have a little portion in the end that would that it's made to look like an oil lamp, but it's not. It's just ceramic. But you could put a little candle in that and walk around with it if you want. I think it's primarily made just for looks, as a little keepsake that you could put up on a bookshelf or something. But these, this shape, like the genie lamp shape, regardless of what it's made out of, these are pretty highly collectible, actually. There are a lot of people who buy and collect these things. So if you find them for cheap, almost doesn't matter what they're made out of or what they look like, you'll probably be able to make some money on them, provided you're not spending a bunch on them. This one sold for $24. I think I paid $1 for it at a thrift store. And it took a couple of months to sell.
Is there a certain manufacturer that's more preferable?
Probably, but I actually don't have that information cataloged, in the old noggin right now. But I know sometimes I do on certain items. But this is not something that I sell frequently because I don't really find them all that often. But when I do, I know from past experience of selling some things and hearing from others that it's something I should pick up. Another kind of fun thing that I sold.
Wait, Matt, before you go on, there is some breaking news on the What Sold podcast. So what you guys don't know is that Matt was digging around in an attic in eastern North Carolina and discovered one of the 4 original copies of the Constitution, and it was sold here in Asheville, North Carolina, which I found amazing. That in the light of all this, did you hear about this?
I did.
They sold it for $9 million at an auction house here in Asheville.
Which is why I'm staying, because I clearly have a lot of money I can now pour into this community.
Well done, Matt.
Hey, listen.
Congratulations. I'm sorry to interrupt you
all.
on that, but I was thinking of that.
Isn't that wild? Isn't
That
that
was
wild?
discovered in like an attic
And
or
I don't
something,
know
wasn't it?
how many copies do they know? I don't even think that they knew that another copy existed till that came out.
Right.
And so,
And they've authenticated it and it's a really good shape.
right. And we've talked
So
we have
look in
talked
your
about
attic.
this before. People will acquire things from older generations of their family who pass away. They'll have things. They'll go into storage units that were left over from friends or family. And there are all kinds of valuable and things of historical significance that exist out there, maybe right under your nose, and you just don't know. You wouldn't know what it was. Sometimes you wouldn't even know what it was when you find it. I mean, years ago, I heard the story of a person who found this interesting looking, almost looked kind of like a helmet or something. And it was stuck between the rafters in the attic of a house. And they pulled it down, and it was some sort of Viking, I mean, like 1,000 years old, like some sort of Viking helmet thing that's just somehow ended up there. They have no idea, passed down, sold at auction for a ton of money. These things are not common, but they do happen, right? And so, why not in your home? I mean, you can look around, and it doesn't have to be super exotic like that and super historically significant. It could be simply that you've got a bunch of Magic the Gathering cards from the first set that your kid had, and it's in the closet, and you don't know it, but you've got thousands of dollars worth of these little playing cards or old Pokemon ones. Those are coming back. Since COVID, the playing card industry really had a resurgence. And so those kinds of things could certainly be there. You could have something in your house that is worth more than your house, and you don't even know.
Yeah. Well, I had a first edition set of Dungeons and Dragons books.
Sure.
There was about 12 that I got in the
70s,
and I gave them away because I had not started working with the What Sold podcast and did not understand what I was hanging on to, but I've subsequently gone back and looked, and I'm like, oh,
just like banging your head against the wall.
Yes, it would have made me a lot of money. Those are very valuable books. They were in mint condition. I had kept them in this box.
You're a big D&D guy at one time?
And I was in middle school, and then when I got to high school, I got busy with girls and sports and stuff, so that kind of went by. But I kept them in this box, and so they were all in mint condition. And so anyway, so the point being here is, and I didn't mean to digress away from what you sold, but I thought it was quite interesting that in our own tiny little town of Asheville, there's an auction house that sold.
It was Brunk
original
Auctions, I think, that did it.
I don't know.
Yeah,
You're the auction guy. I mean, but I didn't even know we had an auction house here.
We have a very large,
I was
internationally known auction house in Asheville. I've got items there right now. I've sold with them for the last couple of years. They've got a large whiskey collection of mine. They've got artwork. They've got jewelry. They've got they've sold instruments for me in the past. So I've got a relationship with them, but they're good. It took a while to get in the door, but they have buyers from all across the world, and they'll do auctions of entire estates, like people who are wealthy, and they're auctioning the entire estate, contents of the estate through them. Brunk, Brunk, not a sponsor, but
interesting. Yeah, not a sponsor, but they should
be. Maybe they will become.
They should be. All right. Yeah. I digress.
One more thing I sold is this really old, like a 1935 copy of a Popular Mechanics. It's like a paperback kind of book. But this was, back when there was no internet and you wanted to learn how to do handyman things or work on your home or on your vehicles or things. There was these types of magazines, these periodical things, Popular Mechanics out of Chicago. And so they're really cool. You can learn a lot. This sold.
The internet before the internet.
That's right. It was just in books,
Now we just go to YouTube
exactly.
channels. But
then in a lot of ways, you're right. Tutorials and things have kind of taken the place of these books, just kind of reading. But that sold for $18. I bought a whole lot, probably 25 copies for about $20. So this one copy sold for almost what I paid for all of them. I've sold maybe a dozen out of that lot so far, and I get one or two sell a month until they're gone, and that's very common for me. Buying things in a group, and within the first month or so, I'll make my money back, and then I don't sweat the rest. I just kind of let it sit for 2 or 3 months, and if I'll delist it, relist it, or sell a similar item and get it back to the top of the queue. and then get a few more sales. And that's just a kind of a normal routine part of my business.
Yeah. Well, listen, I want to say that you kind of broke up. I don't know if it will show up when we release the pod, but I did want to warn people that Matt and I are still working under
duress, internet duress. Yes.
So if it doesn't come across, it is not because we don't know how to work our machinery. It is more because we cannot affect the internet gods that are out there. So there is so much work going on now that every once in a while they'll knock something over that's vital because they're just cutting down trees and putting in new pipes. And
well, the ground is so fragile, I guess would be. I don't know how else to say it, but when all that water came through, it doesn't matter if you're in the valley, even up high. I was hiking up yesterday. I'll talk about it in a second to look for someone that was presumed missing, and there were trees down all on the top of the hill. So it's the state of the ground is very volatile and very soft, and so even little winds coming in now, trees are still being knocked down, and it's going to go down on power lines and things, and so anyways, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah. So anyway, if that was a breakup right there,
we apologize.
Matt sold a popular mechanics book, and it was the internet of the 30s.
1935.
So there you go. And I didn't catch that because it was blurbing in and out on me. But how much did you sell it for? How much did you pay for it?
I sold it for $18. I bought a lot of 20, some of them for $20. So one sale was almost my money back, and then I ended up with I've got several. I've sold about a dozen so far, so I'm into profit, and I don't sweat it. They'll sell over time.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's awesome. You are a magician, by the way.
Thank you for that.
I feel like you go around with your selling wand and you tap things and they appear. I'm always like, I know that's your business, but I love the reveal. It's my favorite part of the show.
Yeah,
what you sell it
exactly.
For, Matt. So keep an eye out for those old magazines and books. They can have great value. We've done it on books. We've talked about them, first editions and things like that. That could be a whole business in and of itself. It's just finding first edition copies of things. I'm sure there are people that are out there that are doing it. If you are a primary bookseller of ancient and traditional books, reach out to us at the What's Old Podcast at gmail.com and let us know. We'd love to have you on to talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, okay. So I want to launch into something here and talk about something I did. So since I've been doing these videos, I've probably put out 5 videos in the last 3 weeks on the Rusty channel, sort of documenting the destruction here, documenting relief efforts, showing kind of what the area looks like, talking about how this is going to change my business. And people have been getting on saying, hey, this is great, but just make sure you rest too. Take care of yourself. Don't kill yourself with all this movement. And it's actually good advice because anyone who knows me personally knows that I don't slow down. I'm constantly working, constantly moving, constantly strategizing. And so yesterday I decided to take that advice. Kind of. So I stopped doing some work, but rather than just, sit down and not do anything, I decided to go down to the Swananoa River, one of these rivers that was flooded heavily, and do some mudlarking. So we talked about this in past episodes, but mudlarking is this term used to describe an activity where people will go along the edges of rivers or lakes. It could probably be any body of water, but I've mostly seen it in rivers, like primarily in Europe, like the Thames River, something where people have been living there for thousands of years.
Hey, hold on really quick. Matt, hold on really quick. I'm going to have to edit that out. You totally broke up. It may still pick up, but I'll start from, I went mudlarking yesterday.
So I decided to go out to a river nearby that was one of the rivers that was heavily flooded and do some mudlarking. And that term describes an activity that people do where they go around to rivers or lakes and they just, when the tide is down or when it's lower level, or maybe it's just had a lot of water come through like we just recently had, and they just look for found items, things that washed up. And
you talked about that you were going to go to England and do
that. Unless something prevents me, my plan is to go to England next year and do this in the Thames River because I've been following some people on like Instagram, for example, that do this, and it's fascinating, and I think it'd be fun. So I thought I'll just walk around, kind of be quiet, kind of take some moments and process what's been happening around here and see if I can find anything of value that I could sell, which would just be more revenue that we can put into the relief efforts here. So I spent about an hour and a half walking around. Now I'll say before I show a few items that I found that I thought this was going to be an enjoyable activity. And in some ways it was. but I was not prepared for emotionally what this experience, what this activity was going to be like for me, because I was just walking around and just seeing. I mean, the first thing I found when I walked up to the edge of a bank was a woman's shoe, like a little slip-on Ralph Lauren shoe. And it just, and after that, I mean, I found dozens of shoes, dozens of articles of clothing. I found some cool old things, and that's what I was really looking for in this area, and not just in this area, but decades ago, it was not uncommon for people to just sort of throw broken pieces of stuff, discard things, just sort of back behind the house or down the hill behind their house. Or, they definitely sent trash out and burned things, but also a lot of places would just, especially in rural areas, they would just have like this little ditch or this little place, and that's just kind of where they discarded things. So over time that gets buried. Sometimes these are near rivers and things, and when they wash out, things that have been decades old or things that have been buried are all of a sudden now uncovered and washed to the surface. And so what I was hoping to find were some things like some bottles or some things that maybe were intact that have some collector value. So I will show you a couple of things, but suffice it to say, I did find a few things. I think my plan is actually I'm going to present these at some point in the coming weeks to viewers of the Rusty the Reseller YouTube channel, and just sort of give a 48-hour thing and say whoever bids the highest can buy this. And you can get this item that I found, but also know that your money that you're spending is going to my community to put money in hands of people who need it or buy supplies for people. So these were found in varying orders. I found tons of debris, tons of things that came from homes, from vehicles. I found an entire trailer smoker, so a big smoker that would smoke meat on the back of a trailer just in the middle of the river. I first found the lid to it probably 100 yards downriver, and then as I kept going upriver, I found the rest of the trailer, and the propane tank was still connected and hooked on, ready to be.
Is it still operational?
I would imagine that if you could pull it out and clean it up and reattach the lid or get a new lid, probably would still be operational, though I have no idea. I mean, it was entirely submerged at one time in water. So
wow, so it was in the Swannanoa River.
It's still there.
It's still there.
It's down by Veterans Park.
Wow.
Down near, where they have down there where the ball fields are and that kind of stuff. The Frisbee golf course in Black Mountain down here.
Yeah.
So it's down in that area. The creek that kind of comes through there and connects with the Swannanoa River.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second, because I think that's really important to note that somebody out there you don't just own a smoker like that because you're like, I'm just having a good time. You own it because you own a business that smokes meat. And so somebody that's out there is, we need to find that person.
Yeah.
We need to find whoever that is and get him back
It's funny
their
that
smoker.
you mentioned that.
And it's no small thing to do
because I'm going to show an item here in a moment that before I go to sell, I'm going to try to find the owner to this. I won't start with that. That'll be kind of towards the end. But I'll show you three things. They're all similar. I'm holding them up right now. These are 3 marbles. One is like a light blue color. The other one's like a brown and white swirl. The other one's a blue and white swirl. They all have little pontil marks. So these are all hand-blown marbles. So these are all probably 1940s would be the newest. These are probably from the 20s or 30s. And were just washed up along the river. Hard to find. I had to look really close because, they're small. And I'm finding them among other broken glass and plastic and other shards of metal and things. I found a floor, I don't have it here, but I found a floor speaker, probably 1.5 feet wide by 3 foot tall, a Pioneer speaker, and it was about 10 feet up in the air in a tree along the river.
Gosh. Well, wait a second. To give people context to this, I drove down through what's known as the River Arch District in Asheville, and there is trash and big chunks of things that are 20 feet high up in the air, up in trees or on fences. When you go through these rivers zones, the river's back to their normal banks now. But on either side, 50 yards or 100, 200 yards, there is what the best word is detritus. It's not just trash, it's everything that would be washed away. Up in the trees, I saw something like that where I saw one of those shipping containers that was sort of up on top of this roof, but connected to a tree 20 feet in the air. So the water just carried this through. you may or may not remember this, Matt, but for anybody that lives in Nashville, there was a dog park that had a giant hippopotamus statue. And a friend of mine sent me a video of it, probably 1.5 miles, 2 miles down the river. There's a bridge from where and he videotaped it. It was literally floating down the French Broad River. And it's probably in Tennessee now. I mean, who knows where it is.
Because that river goes north.
Point being is that there is so much of this that's out there. So mudlarking is seemingly
people will be finding
right
things
now.
for years to come.
Right.
Things are buried in multiple feet of debris and mud and dirt. I know that the antique store that I sold at, I had a 10 by 14 room at an antique store in the Biltmore Village area, and it was completely destroyed. I lost probably $12,000 to $15,000 of inventory in that location, which is the worst of what we encountered, because our home was I just had a little flooding in the basement, but that's easy enough to repair. But a lot of people in there had gold necklaces, jewelry, valuable things that they could be miles downriver. 10 years from now, like a 10-year-old kid's going to walk along the river and find a gold necklace, that came from Asheville, or who knows what. So I found a few marbles. I found a few pieces of pottery. These are the remnants of what would have been a little teacup, and the other one was like just a mug. I know you collect mugs, or did at one time. And this is just a white ceramic, would have been just like a coffee house, coffee shop mug. And this is a smaller one, but the handles are intact. So when these things break up, I guess the handles are a little bit stronger, or less likely maybe to break. So those are interesting. They're not complete, obviously. Another piece I found, which was really interesting, is a part of an old plate, probably from the early 1900s, late 1800s. It has it's a white with blue patterns and pictures. It's got two little birds on the shard that I have. It's probably roughly 4 inches long by 2 inches wide. Very thick. It's clearly a very, very old piece. This piece is not over where there would have been a mark on the back where I could identify. But even this section, I could probably Google Lens it and figure out who the maker was and that sort of thing, which I find fascinating. About 3 feet up in the air on debris in a tree, I found this little glass jar, and it has it's rusted over, but the cap is still on it, the original cap. There's some liquid still in it, probably soaked in from the storm. It says L Design Patented 45. So this is a 1945 glass jar that has been buried long enough that the metal has almost entirely rusted off. That's cool. This would have some value. I'll probably take the rusted portion off, empty it, clean it, and then try to sell that. Probably a $10 to $15, maybe $20 jar, depending. I'll have to look up and see if I can find who the maker is of it. And then the last two things, and again, I found hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of things, but these are just some things I collected to bring back. The two most interesting things I'm going to show now, one is a large aqua-colored, they would call it an aqua-colored bottle. At first, I thought maybe this is a soda bottle, because a lot of times ones that look like this are, once held some sort of soda. Some things I can tell, it has what they would call a blob top on it, so that the top where you would put your mouth to drink is kind of a bulbous sort of round.
Perhaps a great knee-high?
Perhaps. Well, I'm about to tell you, because it's intact enough. There's no cracks. It's fully functional. But first thing I noticed were there are these large air bubbles inside. So that tells me that this was made prior to the manufacturing ability to create these without air bubbles, right? Also, there's no embossing anywhere on it. So probably made before the time when they could do that on bottles. On the bottom, there's a very round horse circle on the bottom, and that's what you would call a pontil. That's when they would stick it on the end of the stick and they would blow, and they would hand blow these things, and they snapped it off at the end. That's how you know. This was not made by a machine. This was made by hand by someone. And on the very bottom of it, there is an embossed figure of a person, like holding an arm up, which is really cool. And on the very bottom, you can't see it from the video, but on the bottom it says the word Pluto. So when I looked this up, this is a water bottle. A Pluto water bottle came out of originally a company out of Indiana, and they were making these bottles from the all the way up into the early 1900s. Based on my research of other bottles, this looks like to be made as one of the older ones. Now, just for information out there, about 98% of hand-blown bottles were produced before World War I, which was from 1914 to 1918. So I knew that almost definitely this was going to be older than 1914. And then about 75% of bottles that are hand-blown were made prior to 1900. So I had a 75% chance that this is at least 124 going on 125-year-old bottle. I would probably date this in around the 1860s to 1870s. So we're looking at perhaps approaching 140, 150-year-old bottle that has been buried either down in the riverbed or along the banks, got just, pulled up out of the dirt and washed down. Who knows how long it traveled until I found it, not even in the riverbed. I was actually up off the banks onto what the flat area that would have had grass. It was actually a cow pasture that's now covered in sand about 3 inches deep. It was just laying on top like somebody had walked up and just sat it there. It was the most interesting thing. But that's not the coolest thing. That definitely will have value. That can sell.
But wait, there's
the last
more.
thing I'm going to show you, when I saw this along the edge, it was barely poking out, but it had a glint of metal. I thought it was the pop top, like a little pop thing off of a can, like a can of soda or something. But in fact, it is a ring. It is an etched ring. It's small. It's probably a size 6, so probably a women's ring. It's like a band, and it is 14 karat white gold. So this is someone's wedding band. I don't know how old it is. I don't know where it came from, but this is the kind of item that I need to contact the police department and say, I found this. If anyone, this is my name, this is my address. I have a ring. If anyone contacts you and says, hey, we've missed some jewelry. If anyone finds something, you can contact me or they can contact me. I would love to return it to the owner if I could, but there's no telling where it came from. And who knows if it came from a home? Maybe this has been buried in the ground. Maybe somebody lost it a long time ago. Maybe they moved away. I have no way of knowing. But the point is, there are some interesting things to be found out there. There are some things of value. I would not recommend people going out and doing this a lot because there is sewage and toxic substances mixed in with stuff. There's decay from dead animals. Oil. I mean, there's, if there's a big smoker sitting in the middle of the river, there could be anything out there. And so I was wearing a mask. I had big rubber boots on. I looked at my boots today to make sure that there wasn't anything corrosive that was eating at my boots, because there have been reports as close as Marshall, which is north of Asheville, where there was a plastics manufacturing plant up there that was completely destroyed, and it washed a bunch of solvents and toxic materials into the water. People were out trying to clean, and the dirt and the mud in the water was starting to eat their clothing and were giving them chemical burns on their skin. So you don't even know what's safe to really walk around in. You have to be very careful. You have to wear gloves. I videoed everything I'm talking about, and you can see me finding these items in real time. For what was real time for me doing it, I'm releasing a video tonight. It's an hour and 15-minute long video. The video is, the first part is where I'm searching for a missing person that someone reached out to me. A family member of mine was connected to someone who was searching for someone. I got the address and I went looking for them. I'm not going to tell you the end of that story. If you want to know, come to the Rusty the Reseller YouTube channel and watch. But then that's the tease.
We call that the tease.
I go along and I go down to Old Fort and I film some of the landscape down there, and I talk about that. And then I do this mudlarking adventure and show all the things that I find. So it's interesting. I was as careful as I could be, and I found some cool things. I'm hoping that I can generate a little bit of revenue that I can put back into the hands of people here who need it. And by the way, if you have a heart to give, if you feel moved to support our community in any way, just email us at whatsoldpodcast@gmail.com. We would be happy to communicate with you. Like I said, a lot of the viewers of our channels have been very generous so far, and I love to see perfect strangers being super helpful and Generous. Yep.
Hold on
We
really quick,
paused
Matt.
again?
You broke up again, and I'll edit that part. Yeah, it fully paused. So it may have gone up anyway. But if you feel you got to whatsoldpodcast@gmail.com, and then
If you feel like wanting to communicate with us about a way that maybe you could help in some way, either financially or otherwise, email us whatsoldpodcast@gmail.com. There have been people through our YouTube channels that have been super generous, donating already, and asking how they can help, and we certainly appreciate it. Like Brandon said, we're going to need help for a long time. I grew up in Missouri. I went to college in a town called Joplin. That town in 2011 was almost entirely destroyed by a mile-wide tornado. And when I stood in that town about a month later, I could not even orient myself to where I was because everything had been knocked down to a certain level. And unless you knew what road you were standing on where, you had no idea where you were. And that town took about 5 years to rebuild to the point where it started to look like a town again, started to look a little bit like it used to look in the mountains, where there's so much difference in roads have been washed away. The ground is not firm, is not settled yet. It could take 7 to 10 years. I hate to say it's going to take longer. And so people will be rebuilding and needing assistance for a very long time. I mean, we're 3 weeks out. We're not even getting news coverage anymore. That's how quickly the media moves on. We've got an election. There are other things that are hot topics and are important. It's not that they aren't. But years down the road, we're still going to be needing help here. And hopefully I'm still here and can still help in some small ways with the business and with communicating with our listeners out there.
Yeah. Well, that is a good word, Matt. I appreciate all the work you're doing. I know there are lots and lots of people that are out there putting time and effort into this recovery. We are grateful for all the listeners. Remember, still, if you get a chance to follow, like, and subscribe, it's super helpful to us. The show continues to grow. It's like become a worldwide phenomenon. So we are grateful to our listeners. We are working on some big things coming up. So we will be back with a new show next week, hopefully with a little bit better Wi-Fi, but you never know. This could be a process. So any last words, Matt? You have anything for the folks?
I'll just say, good luck hunting out there. Be safe, and we'll see you soon.
Absolutely. All right, everybody. Have a great week. We'll be back with the brand new show.
Take care.
Next week. Signing off.